Hi everyone, and welcome back to Brains Are Beautiful. In today's episode, we're going to be solving quadratic equations through factoring, which is pretty cool when you get the hang of it. So to do this, I'm just going to jump right in with an example. So again, just to remind you, quadratics are usually in the standard equation, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. This is usually the easiest form of a quadratic to solve from. They're not always in this type of form, but if you can put them in this form, they're so much easier to deal with. And a quadratic, again, just as a reminder, is basically means that it has a power of 2. No more, no less. There's a power of 2. So not a power of 3, not a power of 4, and not just a power of 1, but it has to have something squared. Okay, and with that being said, let's do an example for factoring. So let's say I have the equation 12x squared plus 3x equals 0. Okay, so this one, I like to think of factoring as the opposite of the distributive property. It's kind of the distributive property in reverse. So for this one, because there's no single constant out here like there is in this formula, we can literally just start pulling things that are similar out. And so if we were to pull things that are similar out, what does a 12 and a 3 have in common? Well, a 3. And what does an x squared and an x have in common? Well, an x. So we have 3x times what's left over in this term. So we have 4x left over in that term plus, well, nothing left over in that term, but we can't multiply it by 0 because that would get rid of it completely. So we have 1 left. Equals 0. So that's basically how to factor that equation. But let's say it said solve this equation or look for the roots. Well, then what you're going to do is you're going to set each of these equal to 0. So you're going to say 3x equals 0, and you're going to say 4x plus 1 equals 0. And the reason you do this is because basically if they're saying the equation equals 0, 0 times anything is 0. So this entire term can be 0 or this entire term could be 0. So that's why we write both. Okay, so then from there, we just solve for x. So divide by 3, x equals 0, or minus 1, 4x equals negative 1, and x equals negative 1/4. So there are our solutions to this equation using factoring. Okay, so as far as factoring goes, that was a pretty simple problem. So let's go to a little bit harder. And let's say we have the equation x squared minus 16x plus 60. And all that equals 0. Okay, so now we can't just pull an x or a number out because this term right here doesn't have an x. So what I want to point out is how if we use FOIL on, let's say, this, x plus m and x plus n. If you don't know what FOIL is, go check out the YouTube tutorial I have called FOIL, and it will walk you step by step through several examples explaining it. But if you do know what that is, it's just a reminder, FOIL is just first, outside, inside, last, and that's talking about the term. So first, outside, inside, and then last. All right, so if we use FOIL on this, we get x squared plus m plus n x plus m n equals 0. So that's kind of how factors and a quadratic in a standard form relate. And so what I like to do is usually make a chart for these. And it helps me solve these. So if I was to take this equation to try to apply all of this to, I like to make a chart that has m, n, m plus n, and m times n as my categories. And then we know that we want in this formula here, we know that we want m plus n to equal negative 16, and we know, because that would be this term, and we know that we want m times n to equal 60, because that would be this term. So if we do this, we could start thinking of what we can divide 60 by. So how is 60 divisible? Well, we can have a 30 times 2. So let's say we have a 30 for m and a 2 for n. So if we go 2 plus 30, we would get 32. So even though the product is 60, this middle number isn't right. So that one's not going to work. So let's just cross it off our list. All right, back to thinking about these. So what's another thing we can divide 60 by? Well, how about 10 and 6? So if I have 10 and 6, 10 plus 6 is 16, and we already said it was 60. So that's really, really close. The problem is we need a negative 16, not a positive 16. So what two numbers can we multiply together to get a positive, but then add together to get a negative? Well, what if we were to make them both negative? So this one's close, but not quite. But what if we were to do negative 10 and a negative 6? So negative 10 times negative 6 is positive 60, and negative 10 plus a negative 6 is negative 16. Ding, ding, ding. So there's our answer. So from there, we can, let's rewrite the equation. X squared minus 16x plus 60 equals 0. And from there, we can just plug these in. So we're going to factor it to an x. And we know if we go FOIL, we know first times first, we need an x times an x for this term. So x and x. We then know from what we just found that we need a negative 10 term and we need a negative 6 term. And that all equals 0. And you just factored it. So that is technically the answer for factoring. If the problem is asking for a solution to the equation or to find the root or where it crosses the x-axis, then we can go ahead and continue to solve this. And that is where, just like before, we set each term equal to 0. So we have x minus 10 equals 0, and we have x minus 6 equals 0, which we can then solve and say that x equals 10 and x equals 6. That is our answers. So thanks so much for watching, everyone. I hope this tutorial was very useful and helpful. Please leave any comments below and like this video if it helped you, and go subscribe to my channel. All right, have a great day, and remember, brains are beautiful.